This week, the Vatican has a new Secretary of State. Pope Francis sells his Harley, and we look at the role of women in the Church. Hello and welcome to Vatican Connections for the week of October 18th. Now, some big changes took effect this week. Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone's tenure as Secretary of State officially ended this week. October 15th was his last day and the day he was supposed to hand over to the new guy. Pope Francis actually visited the Secretariat of State offices that day to personally thank Cardinal Bertone for his service. He said the Cardinal lived these last 7 years, giving himself generously in the spirit of service. The Pope also thanked Cardinal Bertone for being faithful to the spirit of Don Bosco and the Salesian order, of which he is a member. Cardinal Bertone paid tribute to Pope Benedict and said that with Pope Francis there is a continuity with the retired Pope, even though they have different styles. The Pope's visit to the Secretariat of State office was also supposed to be a moment to welcome the incoming Prime Minister of the Vatican, Archbishop Pietro Parolin. But Pope Francis announced that the new Secretary of State had to undergo a minor surgical procedure, nothing serious, and would stay with his family to finish recovering. A little more serious, though, is the fact that the next day, a Twitter account with the new Secretary of State's name and photo appeared, claiming to be the official account. Vaticanistas caught on right away and alerted the press office. Father Lombardi confirmed it was not an authentic account, and within a couple of hours, Twitter suspended the fake profile. The administration of the Patrimony of the Holy See announced two new initiatives this week. First, the office, which is known by its Italian acronym APSA, announced it was creating a supervisory board. The office said 5 people who have currently been serving as APSA consultants have agreed to join the board. Secondly, APSA has an international risk management company to review its books. APSA has hired the Promontory Group to carry out a review of all of its assets. The Promontory Group has already been hired by the Vatican Bank to assess accounts held there. Both moves are based on recommendations made by the Council of Europe's Anti-Money Laundering Committee in 2012. Now, you may recall back in June, Pope Francis was given a Harley Davidson by a group of Harley riders. This week, we learned that motorcycle will soon be auctioned off and the money will be used to renovate the Don Luigi di Ligero hostel and soup kitchen, which is located at Rome's Termini station. And recently, Pope Francis has called for a deeper theology of the role of women in the Church. And he's not the first pope to say this. John Paul II wrote an apostolic letter in 1988 called Mulieris Dignitatis on the dignity and vocation of women. To mark the 25th anniversary of the historic letter, the Pontifical Council for the Laity held a seminar on this topic. Catholic News Service spoke to one of the experts who gave a presentation.
Il primo è ridurre la maternità ad un ruolo sociale, ad un compito anche se nobile, ma che di fatto mette in disparte la donna con le sue potenzialità, non la valorizza pienamente nella costruzione della comunità. Questo sia in ambito civile sia in ambito ecclesiale. E come reazione a questo c'è l'altro pericolo, in senso opposto, quello di promuovere una specie di emancipazione che per occupare gli spazi sottratti dal maschile abbandona il femminile con i tratti preziosi che lo caratterizzano. E qui vorrei sottolineare come la donna abbia una sensibilità particolare per le cose di Dio, soprattutto nell'aiutarci a comprendere la misericordia, la tenerezza e l'amore che Dio ha per noi.
the Church's affirmation of what is both natural law, doctrine, and common sense regarding differences between men and women, and yet equality in those differences, regarding what this requires from society and governments and spouses, right, toward their wives, and boyfriends toward their girlfriends, and fathers toward their daughters. Really, the Church has been quite revolutionary on this, particularly from the papacy of John Paul II forward. It has a lot to offer, but one of the things we're discussing at this meeting is how our witnessing, our testifying, and our communicating on this needs, as Pope Francis is beautifully suggesting, to go over the wall and to be more in the public consciousness. And he is making that space for us.
Hunger and malnutrition can never be considered a normal event to which one must become accustomed as if it were part of the system. Something has to change in ourselves, in our mentality, in our societies. We mentioned earlier in the show that the Pontifical Council for the Laity is marking the 25th anniversary of John Paul II's Apostolic letter, Mulieris Dignitatis. Now, the vocation of women in the Church has become a hot topic once again thanks to Pope Francis. Now, Ana Cristina Villas is the head of the women's sector of the Pontifical Council for the Laity, and she's also behind the seminar that we mentioned earlier in the program. Ana Cristina, a lot of our viewers probably either read Mulieris Dignitatem when it first came out or maybe never got a chance to read it. Can you tell us what are some of the key points of this letter?
It is a historic document because it was the first complete document fully dedicated to the dignity and vocation of women. And it came as a result of a synod on the laity that was celebrated in the Vatican in 1987. In this synod on the laity, many questions about women and women's role in the Church came out. And it was like a key point of many things that the bishop said at this synod and that Pope John Paul heard from them. It is interesting that it seems like the idea of writing this document matured in JP2's mind during this synod of the laity, and he, of course, had given this series of catecheses on the dignity and vocation of man and woman in the first 3 years of his pontificate. But a few years later, he writes this document that is kind of a synthesis of the teachings of those series of catecheses that are the ones we know as the theology of the body. He brings that to focus especially on the vocation of women in Mulieris Dignitatem. It is a beautiful document. It is a first fruits of that synod of the laity. It was even published before the apostolic exhortation, the post-synodal apostolic exhortation on the laity, that is Christi Fidelis Laici. This was even before that. And it is very much like a biblical meditation. It has a lot of scriptural references, and it is a beautiful document that gives us like key points on who is the woman, no? What is the woman's dignity and vocation? It's a concentrate of Christian anthropology, the anthropology that comes from Revelation.
Okay, so then in order for women to live out their vocation in the Church, what needs to change?
Strong point that came out in the Pope's speech to us that was about gifts of femininity. For example, he said there are many things that can change and have changed in women's life, and that is beautiful, that's important. But the fact that women are the ones that conceive and give birth to children, that tells us how women's vocation is very linked to maternity in any way. But then he warns us against reducing maternity to a social role. So I think there is a lot of room for growth in the sense that there is a specific gifts of women that have been there in the history of the Church, but could have much more room in a Church that is maybe less clericalized. There is a lot of room for growth in general in terms of the role of laity as such in the Church. And I think we all suffer from a distortion of seeing the Church as its ordained ministers, in thinking of the Church as the clergy. But the Church is much more. We are all the Church, and there are many roles, and the clergy have obviously their very important central role, but there are many ways of participation that don't require ordination, and those ways of participation, I think, need to be better promoted and need to take more a central role in our own idea of the Church.
Just before I let you go, can you finally tell us a little bit about your role at the PCL and your sector? I think a lot of people associate the Council for the Laity with World Youth Days, but clearly it does more than that. And if you could tell us a little bit about the seminar that you had this week.
What we do is to try and follow up all that pertains to the women in the world and in the Church. Events like the seminar are very central for us because we had there present participants that are already involved in the work of women in the Church or in women, on promotion of women, the dignity and vocation of women in society. So it was like a gathering of experts. We're already working in things and an exchange of ideas and a moment to try and see what are the new challenges that we need to face. So now we all have full of ideas and trying to see what are our next steps, and what else can be done.
Thank you so much for your time. That was Ana Cristina Villas, head of the women's sector of the Pontifical Council for the Laity. We're seeing a slightly slower pace for Pope Francis in these few weeks, but slower doesn't mean uneventful. Monday, Pope Francis met with the members of the Pontifical Council for the New Evangelization who had gathered in Rome for their plenary meeting. It is the newest of the Pontifical Councils and still rather small. Pope Francis told members many people have fallen away from the Church, but we shouldn't look for who to blame. Instead, we need to focus on creating a pastoral plan that focuses on the essentials, which is getting out there and providing experiences for an encounter with Christ. Tuesday was, of course, the day the Secretary of State position was handed over from Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone to Archbishop Pietro Parolin, and Pope Francis visited that office to mark the occasion. Wednesday was the general audience, and in his catechesis, the Holy Father explained just what it means when we say the Church is apostolic. Catholic News Service has more.
La Chiesa è apostolica perché è inviata a portare il Vangelo a tutto il mondo. Continua nel cammino della storia la missione stessa che Gesù ha affidato agli Apostoli. Cosa ha detto Gesù? Andate dunque e fate discepoli tutti i popoli, battezzandoli nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo, insegnando loro ad osservare tutto ciò che vi ho comandato. Ed ecco, io sono con voi tutti i giorni fino alla fine del mondo. Ma questo è quello che Gesù ci ha detto di fare. Insisto su questo aspetto della missionarietà, perché Cristo invita tutti ad andare incontro agli altri, ci invia, ci chiede di muoverci per portare la gioia del Vangelo. La Chiesa ha le sue radici nell'insegnamento degli Apostoli, testimoni autentici di Cristo, ma guarda sempre al futuro. Ha la ferma coscienza di essere inviata da Gesù, di essere missionaria, portando il nome di Gesù con la preghiera, l'annuncio e la testimonianza. Una Chiesa che si chiude in se stessa e nel passato, o una Chiesa che soltanto guarda le piccole regole di abitudini, di atteggiamenti. È una Chiesa che tradisce la propria identità. Una Chiesa chiusa tradisce la propria identità.
And Thursday, Pope Francis met with Mahmoud Abbas, president of the Palestinian Authority. They discussed the reinstatement of negotiations between Palestine and Israel and the situation of Christians in the Palestinian territories and the Middle East. Now, this past Sunday, Pope Francis also entrusted the world to Our Lady during a Mass at St. Peter's Square. The image of Our Lady of Fatima was brought from the Portuguese shrine to the Vatican for this event, and here's more from CNS. Now, there's just a couple of rinunce nomine to tell you about this week, but they're big ones, literally. There was an appointment to the largest geographical diocese in this hemisphere. It's probably also the coldest. Now, Monsignor Mark Hageman of Vancouver was appointed Bishop of Mackenzie Fort Smith. You might not be able to tell by the name where it is, but visiting the diocesan website reveals that it is, in fact, the diocese that covers all of the Northwest Territories. Monsignor Hageman has been serving as principal of St. Mark's Theological College and president of Corpus Christi College at the University of British Columbia. And the next one is interesting. In August, Pope Francis appointed Father Fernando Verghese as the Secretary of the Governorate of Vatican City. This week, Pope Francis decided to elevate him to the rank of bishop. In an unprecedented move, he then wrote a letter to the president of the governorate explaining why he was making Father Verghese a bishop. In short, Pope Francis said it's because he wants part of the governatorato's duties to include the spiritual care of everyone who works for Vatican City, and a bishop's role is to teach and care for those entrusted to him. To emphasize that, what better way than to make Father Verghese a bishop and give him that very specific mandate? Vatican Connections is interactive. Send us your questions or comments by Facebook, Twitter, email, or post. Via email, send comments to info@saltandlighttv.org. And by post, send letters to 114 Richmond Street East, Toronto, Ontario, M5C 1P1, Canada. This week, our Roman profile actually takes us to Brazil, specifically to Aparecida, which is home to the sanctuary of the patroness of that country. Now, although it's across the ocean from Fatima and Rome, the Brazilian devotion to Our Lady of Aparecida is based on the pious traditions that Brazil inherited from the Portuguese traditions, which are very similar to the European religious traditions that Pope Francis would have grown up with in Argentina. Let's take a look at how these cultures relate to Our Lady.
Muitos dizem mesmo que a minha mãe está em Aparecida. E às vezes até ao lado da mãe biológica, mas diz que a minha mãe está em Aparecida. Então o povo sente assim uma familiaridade muito grande com Nossa Senhora. E assim atribui muito a ela quase que tudo que acontece de bom na sua vida. Se tem aí, por exemplo, uma dor de cabeça muito forte, pede a Nossa Senhora e passa aquela dor, então já traz aqui uma fotografia da pessoa, ou às vezes até mesmo é um costume nosso aqui, por exemplo, se alguma coisa que eu recebi, uma graça referente à cabeça, então existem cabeças de cera, pessoas compram uma cabeça de cera e oferto para Nossa Senhora, como sinal de gratidão.
Well, that's it for this week's edition of Vatican Connections. Join us again next time when we bring you up to date on what's been happening in Rome. Thanks for watching and see you next week.